This video is graciously sponsored by one of our patrons, Holly Lyons. The village of Serres, located in southern France, is a small town situated on the edge of the vast forests of the Mont d'Orbe and dotted with red rocks of varying intensities. It would be these very rocks, of which tourists would spend hours getting the perfect shot, that initially seemed to be the downfall of one seemingly unlucky driver who had veered off the road and had crashed into one of these rogue luge boulders of which the tourist pamphlets spoke so highly. On June 7th, 1987, around 1:30 a.m., Daniel Bluhal, a nurse in Sarcelles, was found pounding on the door of various neighbors, asking the residents to call for help. He informed them that he had been involved in a car accident a few kilometers away. He said he had collided with a rock on the side of the road. Remarkably, he emerged from the incident perfectly unharmed. There were no scratches nor injuries on his person. He had not even become breathless from running to seek help. However, the situation was much less positive for his passenger, Yves Dandonneau, a 41-year-old CEO of a small toy company. According to Daniel, his friend remained unconscious inside of the car, as Daniel had been unable to rescue him. Furthermore, Daniel had said there was a risk of the vehicle leaking gasoline and potentially bursting into flames at any moment. He repeatedly expressed his fear of the car catching fire, and cited such a fear as reason for not helping his friend. Upon being alerted, local firemen and police promptly responded to the scene, located at a place known as Col de l'Homme Mort, translated to Dead Man's Pass in English. It was as if the name of the location had foretold what was about to unfold, as when authorities arrived on scene, it was already too late for 41-year-old Yves Dandonneau. The red Austin Metro he was buckled into was found by first responders to be already ablaze. Eventually, firemen managed to extinguish the fire. What was left were the charred remains of Yves Dandonneau. The victim's family was notified, as Yves left behind a wife and 5 children. During the subsequent autopsy, the task of identifying the body fell upon Merc, the deceased's companion, and Danielle Simonin, a secretary and former mistress of Dandonneau. The body was confirmed to be that of the deceased thanks, in part, to a pair of underwear. Yves Dandonneau had in the past expressed a desire to be cremated upon his death, so his body was cremated just 2 days after its identification. In France, it was a requirement for the insured individual to provide consent and to complete a medical questionnaire when entering into a life insurance contract. Consequently, it was a given that Yves was fully aware of the existence of multiple life insurance contracts, all of which combined would allow his partner a substantial amount of money upon his untimely death. Such facts also applied to his partner, who had to sign the contracts as well. In April of 1987, just 3 months prior to his demise, Yves Dandonneau had procured 8 different life insurance contracts, which would benefit his partner, Marie-Thérèse. These contracts amounted to a total of 11,900,000 French francs, equivalent to approximately 1,800,000 euros. A considerable sum, particularly considering the time period. Intriguingly, these contracts coincidentally stipulated that the payout would be doubled in the event of a road accident. Initially, investigators concluded Yves' death was the result of a mundane yet still unfortunate car accident, further attributing the cause of the fire to a short circuit in the headlights. No autopsy had been performed on the body. Daniel Bluhal, who was quickly questioned about the details of the accident upon police realizing that a dead body was involved, was subsequently released and the case was closed. However, a British insurance company, one of 8 companies which had entered into a contract with Yves, took a closer look at the contract documents before transferring the funds to the deceased partner. They found it peculiar that Yves Dandonneau had passed away in a car accident merely 3 months after signing a multi-million-dollar phone contract. Their policy alone was equivalent to approximately 600,000 euros in today's money. They began to suspect that his death may not have been a mundane car accident, but the case of suicide for profit, disguised as a mere automotive tragedy. During the investigation, insurance adjusters discovered that their policy was only one of 8. Yves had accumulated 7 other life insurance contracts apart from their own and had failed to disclose this information on his application. As a result, the company dispatched one of their insurance inspectors, Bernard Gay, to delve further into the matter. This investigator swiftly uncovered several suspicious elements. During police questioning, David Bluhal had confirmed that the car was driven only in second gear, which would have resulted in relatively low speed. Investigators thought it peculiar that the car collided with a rock, which was the sole obstacle on an otherwise clear road, suggesting an uncanny stroke of misfortune and an inability for the driver to simply look ahead. The car itself was completely consumed by the now convenient fire, leaving only the metal frame of the car and the charred bones of its occupant. Indications at the crime scene showed that the fire had potentially started far before David's call for help. Fortunately, the vehicle had been stored in a garage for examination, ensuring the preservation of any possible evidence. Such inconsistencies in the evidence were then magnified when it was found that just 4 days prior to the accident, Yves had sold all of his shares in his company and had named Marie-Thérèse as his sole heir, disregarding her 4 children from a previous marriage. Another insurance company, this time a French one, became suspicious and therefore enlisted the anti-fraud unit of the Professional Federation of Insurers, also known as Alpha, to investigate. The case was assigned to private detective Jean Poissier, who uncovered additional suspicious elements in his inquiry, supplementing the findings of Bernard Gay, the first insurance investigator to question the story. The road in question was a straight stretch. Being so, it seemingly would have been quite easy to have avoided the rock. It appeared highly improbable that a car would collide with such a rock unless it was in a deliberate manner or unless it was caused by the influence of alcohol or drugs. However, testing done shortly after the accident determined that neither drugs nor alcohol were involved. Additionally, it was suspicious that there were no skid marks on the road. When losing control of a vehicle, the inspectors explained, and approaching a large rock, it would be expected for the driver to brake the vehicle. However, a lack of skid marks showed that brakes were not applied. Furthermore, the car's wheels were facing towards the direction of the large rock. Investigators pointed out that obviously there existed an alternative route, which was more accessible and less obstructed. The question arose as to why this alternative route was not chosen. In addition, considering that Daniel Bluhal was trained in first aid, investigators were suspicious as to why he would then leave an unconscious friend who was in a vehicle on the verge of catching fire without attempting to provide assistance. By August 12, 1987, with the submission of Jean Poissier's report, a complaint had been officially lodged with the Montpellier High Court, convincing the courts that their claims were not merely part of a fictional screenplay proved to be a challenge, requiring an additional 3 letters from insurance companies and the involvement of their lawyer, Mr. Clistal. Major Albert Mallet, the head of the research division, was assigned to lead the investigation. Despite the strong suspicions of insurance fraud, 5 out of the 8 insurance companies proceeded with the monetary transfer to Marie-Thérèse Hérault, totaling over 4,250,000 francs. However, the remaining 3 companies suspended the transfer, pending the outcome of the legal proceedings. They justified their decision by highlighting Yves' failure to disclose his long-term absence from work on the medical questionnaire. As anticipated, the investigation would ultimately confirm that the incident was in fact not an accident. Unexpectedly, there was a twist in the case when an engineer from the Center for Application and Research in Electronic Microscopy, a private laboratory affiliated with the French police, managed to recover 3.7 grams of bone. These bones would enable the reconstruction of a jaw, which was missing 2 wisdom teeth. They believed it belonged to Yves Dandonneau. However, upon analysis, it was revealed that this jaw did not correspond whatsoever to the X-ray of the dental impression preserved by the deceased's dentist. Both the police and the public alike were perplexed. If the person in the car with Daniel Bluhar at the time of the incident was not Yves Dandonneau, then who was it? Furthermore, where was Yves? Was he still alive? Following the staged accident, Yves Dandonneau's escape had already commenced. Initially, he sought refuge in Charente-Maritime and settled in a caravan. Eventually, though, the gravity of his and Daniel's unconscionable actions fully dawned on him, and he suffered bouts of intense insomnia. Equally ravaged by guilt and fear of apprehension, Daniel Bluhar, in a state of withdrawal, resigned from his job and fell into a deep depression. Nevertheless, despite his insomnia and anxiety, Yves still had the peace of mind to be able to invite Danielle and Marie-Thérèse for a weekend getaway. It was during this time that Yves' companion, Marie-Thérèse, began leading a double life, needing to balance raising the spirits of Yves' mother, who frequently called to inquire about her son, and postulating about his last moments, along with managing her professional life at the clinic and having to conceal the fact that Yves was actually still alive. 2 days after the investigation was initiated in Montpellier, Marie-Thérèse Hérault, Danielle Simonin, and her husband would withdraw 2.4 million francs in cash from a post office in Paris's 15th district. The post office employees sensed something was amiss with such a substantial cash withdrawal and promptly alerted the police, leading to the detention of the 3 individuals. It was subsequently revealed that Danielle had made 2 prior trips to Caen, where she had opened a bank account under her maiden name on October 24, 1987. Her intention was to deposit the withdrawn money into this account during their visit. While there was considerable circumstantial evidence to suggest that the 3 were involved in something nefarious, the judge disagreed. The 3 were swiftly released, and the money was returned to them. Worried about the precariousness of the situation, Yves decided to make a drastic choice: to undergo plastic surgery in order to evade recognition by authorities. Now convinced of the inauthenticity of the preceding events, the justice system mobilized all available resources to locate the now felon Yves Dandonneau. Through phone surveillance and through tracking his relatives, police eventually pinpointed Yves' whereabouts. He was certainly alive, and on January 15, 1988, after an intense manhunt, Yves Dandonneau was apprehended in a villa in La Rouée in a town near Caen. In his bid to elude police, Yves had undergone 5 plastic surgeries. During his escape, he had attempted to assume a new identity as one Bernard Dupin. Following his arrest, exhausted from the ordeal, Yves quickly confessed his true identity and implicated his accomplices, who were still in l'Île-de-France region. Within a matter of hours, the entire group had been rounded up and put into police custody. Once police were able to question all individuals, the true story was able to be brought to light. Yves had initially conceived of the idea of stealing a corpse from the morgue to take his place in the fabricated car accident. He approached Daniel Bluhar, who was a hospital technician experiencing depression and financial difficulties. Yves requested that he help remove a body from the hospital morgue, where he currently worked. In exchange, he offered money, which would help alleviate many of Daniel's current issues. However, carrying out the operation proved to be impossible, prompting Yves to seek further assistance from another friend, François Monnier. The plan was straightforward. They would locate a homeless man, murder him, and use him as a substitute for Yves in the accident. The chosen victim was Joël Hippoux, a 40-year-old man, Ironically, he happened to be the son of a former police officer in the armed French forces and was himself a former CEO, known for his brilliance as the youngest high school graduate in France. Joël had a law degree and was proficient in multiple languages. However, following a divorce, his life had spiraled downward, leading him to become fully dependent on alcohol. At the time that he would cross paths with Yves Dandonneau in a park in Sarcelles, he was already homeless and deeply dependent on alcohol. To Yves, the homeless man resembled his father, and in his mind he was deemed nothing more than human waste, suitable for his plan. Together with Daniel Bluchard and François Meunier, they enticed Joël with a trip to the south of France, specifically to Sète. They told him that he would be retracing the footsteps of Georges Brassens, his favorite singer. On June 6, 1987, Yves and Joël departed Paris in a rented R21 car. Daniel would follow them in the red Austin Metro, belonging to Marie-Thérèse Herral, the vehicle that would later be involved in the planned accident. Prior to their departure that morning, Yves had left a note on his desk for his wife, stating, "If anything happens to me, look in the binder, in the insurance folder. I love you, my love." Throughout the journey, Yves made sure to supply Joël with ample alcohol, which the man consumed in abundance. Unbeknownst to the man, who thought he was on the trip of a lifetime, Daniel and Yves had mixed 50 Valium tablets into the alcoholic beverages. The combination of medicine and alcohol eventually took its toll on Joël, causing him to fall unconscious. Yves and Daniel, believing him to be dead, began arranging the staged accident by driving the Austin Metro off of a ravine to make it appear like it was a fatal fall. However, in the process, Yves noticed that Joël was still alive, leading the two men to postpone their plans. On June 7, 1987, during their lunch break near the Col de l'Homme Mort, the trio enjoyed a picnic on the grass. Yves and Daniel made Joël consume 1.5 bottles of wine, as well as a full bottle of whiskey. Eventually, Yves and Daniel left Joël under a tree and drove the car to scout the location of their intended accident. Upon returning to the spot where they left Joël, around 5 p.m., they discovered that he had fallen into an alcohol-induced coma. Throughout the night, Yves and Daniel changed Joël's clothes in order to match Yves' current attire. Then they placed him in the passenger seat and drove to the Col de l'Homme Mort. Deliberately, they accelerated the car towards the only obstacle on the road, the large rock, before exiting the vehicle after it crashed. They doused the car in gasoline and set it ablaze. Yves departed the scene in the rental car, while Bluchard went to the nearest village to ostensibly seek help. With no autopsy conducted and Joël's body reduced to ashes, it remains impossible to determine the cause of death. Some wonder if he may have been alive when the car was set on fire. Family and friends of Joël grieve not only his loss, but also the inhumane manner of his death. The trial of Yves Dandonneau commenced on June 30th, 1992, at the Montpellier Assize Court. However, Yves' lawyer, Alain Filbery, successfully obtained a postponement of the trial until October 12, 1992. This delay was granted due to the president of the court's pre-trial interview given to the press, where he had already condemned the accused. The president's statement had read, quote, "Yves Dandonneau had immense potential. He could have done very good things. He had an excellent situation and earned a good living. He chose the worst in a diabolical scheme. Human justice is going to come to this." All the hotels surrounding the courthouse were fully booked for the trial, indicating widespread interest in the murder and conspiracy narrative. After only 4 days, on October 16, 1992, the trial concluded. Yves Dandonneau was sentenced to 20 years of criminal imprisonment. Daniel Bluchard received a sentence of 14 years. François Meunier was sentenced to 9 years in prison. Marie-Thérèse Herral and Danielle Simonin were sentenced to 4 years of probation for each of their complicit actions in fraud. In the ensuing years, the media hounded Yves to explain his heinous actions. Yves, a former insurance agent, detailed how he had grown up in the presence of an alcoholic and violent father, a police officer who had an obsessive quest for treasure, leading him to acquire vast hectares of land in the Hérault region of France. Yves recounted that one night, as a child, he witnessed his father cruelly breaking each finger of his wife, a violinist, as punishment for her returning home from a rehearsal slightly late. Yves said that because of this, he harbored the dream of establishing a school for children in similar abusive circumstances. He estimated that his project would require 10 million francs, and said his toy company was not generating sufficient profits to realize this dream. This is when, he claims, he had the idea of orchestrating a life insurance scam. After his story came out, many found it hard to believe that a man would mastermind such a fraudulent scheme, all in order to acquire sufficient funds to create a school on a Greek island specifically for children living in abusive households. Critics of his story say that for one to feign his own death, to kill an innocent man, to undergo plastic surgery, and to include 2 other women in the process seems not like the work of a philanthropist, but that of a madman. As for the reasons why the others joined him in this endeavor, Marie-Thérèse, his partner, happened to be working at the same clinic as Daniel Bluhal. She helped facilitate Yves' approach and establishment of a friendship with Daniel. This is how Yves was able to confide his plan in Daniel, who seemed to view this idea favorably and had agreed to help him remove an unidentified body from the hospital morgue. Francois Meunier had also crossed paths with Yves. He had learned about his plan for a school for abused children and liked the idea so much that he offered to become the cook at the future school. When the initial plan involving the morgue did not succeed, it was Francois's turn to provide assistance. According to Yves, it was Francois who had proposed finding someone to impersonate Yves. However, Francois claimed the opposite, stating that Yves had requested him to locate, quote, a very shabby man. Danielle Simonin, apart from serving as Yves' secretary, had been his mistress for a period of time. He had encountered her during his tenure in the insurance industry. The reasons behind Danielle and Marie-Thérèse agreeing to aid Yves in this venture remain somewhat unclear. Some speculate that their involvement may have been driven by love alone, while others say that money clearly played a role. Yves Dandonneau had undertaken all of these actions, including the killing of an innocent man, all with the intention of purchasing an island in Greece and constructing a school for abused children. In these uncertain times, a special thanks to all of our patrons for their continued support. You can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/Merc07 or just search Patreon Merc.